Welcome, everyone. Good evening. We're so glad that you joined us for our program, A Community Approach to Art, Supporting Communities by Engaging Artists and Youth. My name is Zaylee Lewis, and I'm the Director of Communications at Beam Center. And tonight I'll be serving as the moderator. So I'll provide some prompts and encourage discussion amongst our excellent panelists, and then I'll help facilitate the Q&A at the end. Before we get started, I wanted to just review a few housekeeping items that by now we're all well versed in, but you have access to both a chat and a Q&A function. So throughout the night, feel free to chat with your fellow attendees or the panelists, and then please put your Q&A or your questions that you want answered in the Q&A tab. And that is where the panelists and myself will be reviewing them. And finally, we are recording this program, and it will be posted to the Beam Center YouTube channel following its conclusion. And I'll also make sure that we send a link to the recording to all of you in the audience who have registered and to our panelists. So you'll have access afterwards, don't worry. Okay, without further ado, I'd like to kick it off by inviting our panelists to introduce themselves and to give us a quick 3 to 4 minute synopsis of the organizations that you work for, or your artistic practice, or your connection to Beam Center. Who would like to start?
I'll start. My name is Brian Cohen. I'm the co-founder and executive director of Beam Center. We work on collaborative projects with young people and artists in many different contexts, and we use those projects as a way of creating an environment for learning and for working. Who's next?
Happy to go next. Hi everyone, my name is Lina Alfonso, and I'm the program manager of grants and services at Lower Manhattan Cultural Council, or otherwise known as LMCC. We are a nonprofit organization that serves, connects, and makes space for artists and community through a wide range of programs. We have residencies for artists, both in the financial district and at the Art Center at Governor's Island. We have free public programming, including the River to River Festival that takes place every summer, as well as exhibitions at the Art Center at Governor's Island. And we also offer free opportunities for artists, including grant programs that support Manhattan-based artists, organizations, and groups in presenting arts programming in Manhattan, and a creative aging residency for teaching artists to deliver arts programming at senior centers in Manhattan. And so within all of that work, what I do is manage the re-grant programs for Manhattan artist groups and organizations. I'll pass it to Deb.
Oh, did you say Deb?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, just wanted to make sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Deb or Deborah, and I'm, I guess, going into college freshman, soon be at Duke. So I'm really excited about that. I first attended Beam Camp in 2018, and Beam did a program at my school in 2018 when I was a graduating middle schooler, and he was actually my teacher and introduced me to like so many cool art concepts and like a different level of like thinking about how we could connect it to society. So super appreciative for that like transition in my life. And yeah.
That sounds great. I'll go next. Rodney Fuller. I'm here tonight in my capacity as Interim Executive Director for Queens Council on the Arts. The council promotes arts throughout Queens for artists and for organizations. And, great to be here. My pronouns are he, him. I'm a person of the global majority, and I'm looking forward.
So I'm the last one. Hi, my name is Qin Zhu. You can just call me Yi. I am an interdisciplinary artist. I make paintings, public arts, and social practice. So I was initially involved with Beam Center probably around 2016-17 as an instructor, and then I applied for their open call and beam camp, and from there I worked in their large project, and then I also helped them spearhead the new space in Governor's Island with another project, which is awesome. And currently, I'm an innovation fellow at Sci-City, which City stands for Center of Innovative Thinking at Yale. And I'm also involved in On Memory project in New Haven, working with the Public Department of Cultural Affairs to revitalize a brownfield and turn it into Healing Garden Art Park.
Wonderful. Thank you all for being a part of this tonight. And I just want to say it's very serendipitous that Deb and Yi are here. I helped put together the panel, and I know both of you quite well independently, but I did not realize that Yi was the artist that worked with Deb all those years ago. So this is great. I thought it would be helpful to situate our conversation in the kind of broader movement towards community engagement in the arts world that has been happening for a while now. But I think we can all say we've seen some really great attempts at community engagement and some rather poor attempts at community engagement. And there's lots of research and writing around all of this. But I thought it might be helpful to talk about how each of our organizations or our practices approaches community engagement, specifically in arts-related programming. So if anyone would like to share how you guys approach this topic. And this can be a popcorn style conversation. You guys can, whoever wants to take the bait.
Well, I'll start because we just finished the whole program where we had called QAF. We had panelists responding to and interviewing artists around submissions for their arts projects and things that they want to engage with going forward. A lot of that was a re-granting of DCLA dollars and granting nearly 200 artists with that sort of stuff. And so part of me is talking because I just wrote the last check today and sent it off. I want to make sure that all the artists that we're sponsoring got supported and got paid, so I can share that information.
That's excellent, Rodney. Congratulations congratulations to the artists who you wrote the checks to. You know, for us, you know, we come to the idea of community art creation in sort of a strange way, and in many ways we are still evolving or growing into to what that really is. Because when we started our sleepaway camp in New Hampshire, I don't think we even thought about it as community art because we were creating a community. We were not engaging with a community. We were, you know, and the community we were creating was built around the big idea of the artist whose idea we were commissioning to have young people like Deb create. And so we use the art as a community making tool. You know, for better or worse, we weren't really you know, engaging the community that lived around the camp. It was when we started working in New York and that first started working with schools, which Yi was part of, was when we started and we wanted to, you know, commission art to be done in New York. We had to start thinking about like, well, where are we and what community are we engaging with? And in many ways, we're still trying to figure out how that works. But for us, it still starts with the idea and how we invite young people into making that idea. Really the next step, it was somewhat represented on this call, is where we're making the idea and who is in that place that we're making the idea with. And we're so honored to be working with LMCC as members of the Governor's Island community this summer as we create our project for the summer called Tree Chuangs. So our approach to engaging with community in art is still emerging, and we hope to learn from folks like you.
From my experience in 2018, I remember very clearly, Yi had we made kites with wood. We cut it and cut out wooden kites, and we had to kind of express how we felt about society. And I remember my group, we drew an elephant and then did a bunch of swirly colors inside to show that the elephant in the room is the diversity that is lacking in a lot of major industries and fields. And the kites are still there, on the side of the school building. So anytime I pass it, I point it out to my friends, and that was years ago. And it's still something that past graduates could look back at and remember what they thought was something that was important to express in their artwork about society at that time.
Yo.
That was one of the most profound projects I've been involved with. It was part of a teaching gardens. And this was actually sort of a year or two before the pandemic, but we built out a classroom outside of Andreas Hootie Junior High School or high school. So for me, it's mostly about collaborating. How do you collaborate? Because as an artist, I've been involved in projects in where I take on many different roles. So for example, working with high school students, I asked, how do you collaborate? Who are the stakeholders? And how does BEAM work? What resources are available? So I'm constantly just working with everything that's available. How do you maximize that? And how do you give agency to the students who are there, right? How do you allow students to voice themselves? How do you guide them? How do you try to guide them to be brave? And as a group project, how do you show who gets to be the leader, who gets to take turns to be the leader, and who's doing what? And so that's one way I think about collaboration. For the BEAM projects, for example, these larger scope projects, I have my own vision and BEAM Center has their own vision. So how do these entities come together and deliver something that has an audience? And the one in Governor's Island, I mean, that was something that I thought about, that is one of the larger projects that I work with, because my stakeholders are not only maybe, for example, for painting, the few viewers are going to be seeing it, but the stakeholders is the city. It's a big park. And how do you communicate certain ideas that I hold? And how do you work with Beam Center to communicate all these ideas in Governor's Island? And lastly, the project I'm involved with now called On Memory in New Haven, I'm working with the city, and we're working with the neighborhoods that hit the hardest by COVID-19. And we're trying to revitalize a brownfield, which is a contaminated, unusable land, into a healing garden art park. And the project started with the Department of Cultural Affairs, with the architecture firm called Atelier Cho Thompson, as well as Yale. But how do you move leadership away from the people who started to a place-based grassroots leadership? And we're slowly figuring that out now after 2 years. And we've recently got an Andrew Mellon Foundation grant to hire the people who are affected in these locations to take on executive director roles. So that's my relation to just collaborative work, really, in communities.
Yeah, this is so fascinating to hear the different perspectives from everyone, because I feel like community engagement has so many different layers and approaches depending on the purpose and the context in which we are working. Because at LMCC in particular, from my point of view as a grant maker, when we talk about community engagement, we also see even different layers. There's the layer in which we are working directly with artists to support them in preparing applications to the programs, to know about the programs. So how that work that we do in terms of building relationships with the different communities that we want to ensure know about these resources and are well set up to be competitive in the meeting. So there's a lot of being present at the different locations throughout the borough of Manhattan to ensure, we are there and going into the communities we want to see come to the programs And so building like that trust, building those channels of communication and of collaboration, because it's very much about like, we are here with these resources, but we want to learn what is important and needed by the artists in order to come to us and prepare proposals. So I think there's that layer in terms of how we work with artists directly. And then because the programs, the grant programs are meant to support arts programming by artists living in Manhattan and presenting them to audiences in Manhattan, there's a lot of focus in the programs themselves around understanding why artists want to present their particular programming to the particular communities that they want to reach, whether they're defining that by age, geographic location, artistic genre, however it is that they want to define it. But there's a lot of these notions of like being aware of what are the needs of the communities where artists are working, what why are they to present the particular work, or how are they inviting the community in providing feedback, or is that community like reflective in the programming? And so I feel like a lot of the kind of strengths that we've seen in the applications we get to the grant programs around community engagement work has been on projects that show that kind of flexibility and awareness of like the constituencies that the artists want to reach, and that notion of wanting to be responsive to those kind of communities, having in mind, you know, artists have their artistic practices and visions. So it's a bit about kind of connecting to Yi's point, a bit of like what that vision is and those interests with like the kind of observations of where this piece wants to be installed and what people in that community want to see or input on, yeah, how that should happen. So yeah, that's a little bit from our side.
One thing I'm noticing that many of you have mentioned is the role of fiscal resources and the distribution of fiscal resources and all of that. And I know that you probably have one perspective on it, and then Beam has a very different one, but then Rodney and Lina, you guys both work for arts councils. And so Rodney, you were talking about mailing those checks and talking about having to get those out, but can you speak a little bit about the impact of distributing financial resources to communities, especially communities of artists?
Yeah, sure. I can't emphasize enough how much on the receiving end, the artists themselves who are trying to put on these works that they've created for the community rely on these resources, you know, and they have commitments, right? You know, other vendors that they might use or to buy the supplies or the resources, to rent the spaces out, to put those things on, to do that kind of stuff. And they're trying to make sure that they have what they need to actually complete the job. So to me, it's tough because, you know, you might get awarded $500. You might get awarded $1,000. You might get awarded 2,000 or more, right? And to watch someone who's so, and I'm talking about a lot of artists here, who's so passionate and so committed to doing this work, and if the only thing they're asking for is a little bit of help to get it to happen, and they're relying upon $500, they're relying upon $1,000. And part of this is not really my critique about artists per se, because I think that artists are what God artists are, right? This is a critique for me, and I hope it, you know, I'm going to be honest, of arts as an industry. Arts is a field that we are creating a situation where people are fighting over such little resource for their passion. They're fighting for such little resource for their creativity, for their art and that kind of stuff. And it's so monumentally important to them to be able to sort of do this thing, to put up this work, to put on this work. There are times when I've had conversations with artists, and I'll be honest, you know, my heart bleeds for them. My heart pours out for them because I know that their art, they're so hungry for their art and they're so passionate about their art, and they're so reliant upon $500 or $1,000 or $2,000. It's like, that's driving them for this. Like, I almost, and not that the money matters, but I almost want to say, hey, I wish we could do more. I wish we could bring more resource into this industry to feed these kinds of passions and these kinds of productions, and support artists and institutions, particularly mostly artists, and sometimes it's small institutions also, to get to do that sort of work. So, we're always trying to, on our end, shake the trees, put on our knee pads. Why do we need knee pads? Because we're begging, right? We're out there, we're going out there begging for the artists. We're going out there begging for the institutions, and all we're doing, because these are largely pass-through dollars I'm talking about, right? I'm talking about, like, they hit our books for like a minute. Like a few months they're on our books, and then our objective is to get as many of those dollars out the door and into the hands of artists and institutions, and do the work that maybe larger institutions can't do, or a larger benefactors or donors can't do. And we're trying to increase the size of that pot. And I think we're all suffering because of that, because it's creating a poverty mindset. It's creating a beggar's mindset. We're all out here, like, with the cup in our hand, hoping, right, to be able to do this stuff, and I say all this to say that part of me wonders, like, why? Well, like, can we challenge the industry to get better at this? There are some artists, there are some institutions that are the haves, and they get bigger grants and that kind of stuff. And I hate them because, and I'll be honest with you, because of what they do to the industry, because they feed the hopes and the dreams of a majority of artists who are the have-nots. One day I can get a lot of money for my art, for my work, for my production to feed me, and I can live off of this. People are having a tough time living off this, right? They're having a tough time creating, like, for their art, creating for their passion. Like, I lose track over how many artists I've talked to who drive Uber or do some other kind of gig work so that they can feed their passion, right? We need to, and I hope we can have real honest dialogue with the industry about artists and the community of artists that are trying to create and adding more money and more resource to the industry to allow them to do that. I'm on my soapbox. I'm sorry, I lost my point, but this is how I feel about it.
No, that's interesting. I'd be interested in hearing Yi's perspective on that as a practicing artist, and if you could speak to how you're seeing artists talk about these same issues.
Oof, I was just typing thank you for your honesty and perspective. It really hit home hearing that. Yes, it's being in, I mean, I think Brian's known me for a while, and he knows that I've done many things, and being an artist is the hardest thing I've ever attempted to do. I'm trying to go full-time art, and because there's no resources, and for me, community art is really important. I've been part of communities making art for as long as I made art. But there's also a very commercial aspect to art making that I have to contend with. How do I draw the line between the parts that I get zero funding for and the parts that I may, like you said, the stars that show that maybe this is a possibility, like how do I maybe get to that arena? So for example, the On Memory project is 100% volunteer. The grant we got is going to hiring a executive director from the neighborhoods that hit the hardest, and hiring locals to work in the projects, I believe in place-based and experience-based leadership. But that stuff, I'm not, that's just me being passionate about what art can do. I believe that, one of the questions they asked me, like, why do you want to do this? Because, and we have this money that could go towards anyone who can, use this real material resource for food or housing, because a lot of people are suffering, right? Why do we want to put it into the arts? Because I believe that if something like an art park gets built, you know, there aren't metrics to measure what success looks like, but it touches on a more spirit level that may resonate out further in a longer period of time. So there's in my mind, that's what I believe in, and that's why I keep going back to this work and this thing. But yes, you know, the community as part of my art practice, which I do spend a good chunk of my time in, doesn't support me at all. And it's a lot of asking for money, asking for funding, and asking and asking and asking. And then the other part is the dream building part, right? Like you see there's these like superstar artists and you're like, okay, well, how do I get from here to there? But how do I retain both practice? A lot of artists don't have social practice with sort of more commercial gallery. I mean, yes, there are many that do, but not a lot do.
Thank you. Well, if anyone else wants to jump in, feel free, but.
Well, yeah, I can jump in if you don't mind. I mean, you know, I have to admit, I've always been ambivalent about calling what we do art with young people, even when it was artists or designers or architects that we were asking to contribute their ideas that of course we pay for to build the projects, because our capitalist-based, you know, world treats art as a commodity that has a value, or it treats arts as a nice to have, but not a necessity. And so for us, involving young people in a collaborative hands-on project is less about art making, even if the pretext for doing it is art or someone's vision of art, as it is to have them understand the value of their contribution, and that and for them to see that ideas and passions, as Rodney says, have value, and that because we're functioning in the world that we function in, that value is represented by dollars, but that it is also possible to get those dollars by doing something that you love, and that something that you care about, or that you can care about something, or that you can do something better if you care about it. So the projects that we do, we are often paying young people to be part of it, or we are training them to be able to be paid to be part of it, so that although we're to some degree we're using art as a pretext for young people to understand that ideas matter, that their ideas matter, and that their labor has a value. So that is our perspective on it, less from the artist perspective, who we always pay, than from the why we use art as a way of having young people understand how important learning and work are.
I think that's actually something that I find powerful about actually using the label of art for some of the things that we do at Beam. And I see this a little in having learned more about LMCC's approach to recruiting artists and the ways that you look for artists in your processes, is that you expand the meaning of art, and that for a lot of people, art might mean one thing or look like one thing. And that taking it outside of that box, I think, is really powerful in changing that for others.
Yeah, I feel like that's something like really big, I would say, in the ways we look at the grant programs in particular. And I think like it's something that really came up a lot in our team conversations and really informed our approaches, like more like public speaking of the programs in the last few years coming out of the pandemic. And it was this idea that we were like, yeah, like for us, arts are essential to so many components of our social dynamics. Like arts exist at the intersection of education, of like public health, of like economics. Like arts are not a component that stand alone in our cities and in, you know, our day-to-day. It is something that very much exists in the ways in which we are part of a community through the art making, or we learn like social skills or, you know, professional skills sometimes through the arts. And yeah, I feel like that's been so big for us to really emphasize and ensure that the programs help to expand that idea, that is not just about, which could be as well, just going and experiencing a beautiful piece of art. That is very much something we welcome in the programs, but we also see it going beyond there. So using just art as a tool to create another level of like more like conversational or psychological transformation, or yeah, personal transformations. And so I feel like, yeah, that very much resonates a lot what you were saying, Brian, as to like how you approach that kind of your programming at Beam, with the sense that, you know, arts is a big piece, but it is like a way in which the process helps to achieve certain more long-lasting impact on the people who participate in the programs.
That's actually a great segue. I wanted to ask Deb to share a little bit more about her experiences at Beam Camp related to art or art making, and the experience of working closely with an artist.
Okay, so I appreciated everyone's contribution to the conversation. It was really interesting. Art supplies are expensive. So anytime I was able to engage with art in a community setting, that was just truly such a blessing, because, you know, I know other like students who, you know, they're not able to afford it and just have the leisure of like expressing themselves through art. So like literally the community engagement is a way for them to indulge in their passions. And when I attended Beam Camp, my first year, my first art project was spray painting. I've always wanted to do spray painting, but I was never able to like get the materials because it's also very expensive. So when I like brought the idea to Brian and like the rest of the counselors, they're like, yeah, okay, like just, you know, tell us what you need. And like just from that, I was able to explore a whole new form of art. And then my second year, I was able to do a mural on the side of the art barn. And that was definitely community engagement, because it was such a huge wall to cover, and like I didn't want to get on a ladder. So there were some people who got on the ladder for me to like paint the top and stuff. And even though it was like my project, it was something that everyone got involved with, and that was just such a great experience. So I think that community engagement in art, like Beam encompasses that in a way that is truly unique and has truly impacted my life, because that's probably my proudest piece that I'll probably ever be able to do, because, you know, I was like afforded that opportunity, you know. So yeah.
I'll just say, we may have created an opportunity, but Deb was remarkably resilient and focused in making that happen. I mean, murals take time, they take planning. She had, other than the materials, she had very little support to plan and execute this fairly large piece. It still is impressive to me that that she did it on her own. I'm looking for the picture to show it, but we can keep going. I'll maybe
there's something I want to add actually. Whenever you allow young people to participate in community engagement artworks, it's teaching us to be leaders, and it's giving us an opportunity to work with others and teamwork and building skills. And like Brian's like, you know, just like you said, you're kind of surprised I was able to pull it off, but I went to Beam Camp prior to that and I saw how you guys worked with everyone. I didn't try to just take it all on my own. I asked for help, and like, even though I was like trying to direct people, I was able to do that from experience and, you know, just from past experience, which you guys offer to students in each one of your programs. So on behalf of young people worldwide, thank you.
I was going to just ask for all of us to talk about the ways in which engaging youth in the arts is important, but is there anything else to say after that? No, I do think though, I would like to hear maybe from Yi's perspective, we talk so much about different communities and that each of us, you know, a neighborhood, a school, and a group of artists or young people, those are all, they could be definitions of a community, but specifically the relationship between artists and young people and how that informs your practice or has shaped your practice.
Yeah, that my practice, I mean, the works in the back actually don't represent the full scope of my practice. My practice is pretty all over the place. It's pretty interdisciplinary. I keep an open curiosity. So I just a little bit of a backstory. I graduated from the Cooper Union in 2010, but I didn't make art for about 5 years because I didn't feel the experience of being in Cooper opened me up to being in touch with different parts of my artistic sides. In fact, I actually closed down certain parts of my artistic side. And it was only working with my kid cousin at the time, who was 8, that we just was able to really like open up the canvas to beyond the canvas. We were using boards, we were using shape paper, we blended paper. A lot of what I learned from there, I brought to Beam Center actually. We did a large project where we pulped up paper, and it was a collaborative project. Like, you know, all the youth was able to throw and use different colors and different larger tapestry of pulp paper. And we glued materials on, and that process sticks with me even till today. I could just do a very quick studio tour. You see, there's all my works. These are new works that are happening now. There's a lot of materials glued onto it. It's the resourcefulness of working with youth, resourcefulness of actually working in organizations like Beam Center, just seeing what's available. Again, once it goes back to collaboration, I'm always collaborating. I'm collaborating with my environment. I'm collaborating with my experiences in life. I'm collaborating with what I have at hand. Depending on what I have, I either scale up or scale down at the moment. So right now I'm in a studio residency, so I'm scaling up for sure.
That's great. I also think I want to call out a recent project that we kind of did a next step on, which was Constellation Lights. So if either Brian or you, if you want to provide some context to what that was and the ways in which it took something that was a partnership between Beam and you as an artist and the young people, but then firmly planted it in a community here in New York City.
I'm gonna let Brian take this because I just spoke.
Are we talking about the original Governor's Island version, or?
I'm thinking, well, you could speak about that first, but then I'm also thinking about the version that was up at Andrew Friedman Home.
Got it. Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we were, you know, the Constellation was a project that really evolved out of the pandemic to some degree, because when Yi was originally scheduled to have a project at Beam Camp in 2020, we had to move it to 2021, and as a really a response to enabling young people to be outside in the summer of 2021, we committed to a summer program on Governor's Island and really didn't know what project we would do. So we turned to Yi and said, you got something that might tie into what you're already doing in New Hampshire, and Constellation was literally already in his head, and so that we worked on that on Governor's Island, where we extended Yi's universe, which is the project that we did in New Hampshire, to a constellation that was on Governor's Island. But as we moved into, what was it, the fall, we had engaged a group of students at Bronx International High School, and we were looking for an opportunity to put them in a production environment. Sort of, I think because Yi had already been engaged at the Andrew Friedman home, he suggested that perhaps we would be able to extend the Constellation project by adding elements that had originally been in his head when we first contemplated it for Governor's Island, and include these young people from the Bronx at a Bronx site, and so that's what we did, and it created this incredible opportunity to engage young people from the Bronx in expanding the life and sort of the expressiveness of the Constellation project.
Thank you. I can say, from having been up there a few days and seeing the young people working, it was fascinating to see them working in a space that was a 10-minute, 15-minute walk from their school, and how they quickly became to feel at home in that space. And then how even people like walking by or looking in and kind of asking questions. And it was, I think it was a project that showed from start to finish how engaging these different communities along the way can lead to a very substantive place in a physical location for those people. I was also wondering about if we could speak to the impacts that you guys see as a result of community engagement. Yi mentioned earlier, it can be so hard to like measure or quantify what community engagement does, but what are you guys seeing as the results of this work?
Well, something that maybe from the grant programs, from what I've seen and noticed, just more in a informal exchange with grantees and artists that come to us for grant programs year after year, since people can apply every year for these opportunities. I've seen that artists that tend to have practices where there's a lot of emphasis on building a community with the public they're reaching, or that or they're very rooted in a particular community. I've seen that, over the years or incrementally, might help to create a sense of belonging, which is something that I see also from artists that do projects that have that kind of like socially engaged focus or approach, or the address specific to a particular community. So I do think that power of like someone who might not know about a particular artist or might not even be interested in art, but stumbles upon a piece, for example, what Deb was speaking about, the kites that they made, and then being able to like reflect about it, or feel seen and feel like they're part of a larger kind of group, and in that way establish social connections with other people who otherwise maybe they wouldn't, unless there was that kind of context or artistic experience that allowed for that. I think that has been one of the pieces that I've valued a lot, just personally, from these types of practices and projects.
What comes to mind for me is young people, art, community, and empowerment / leadership. So I know I'm here in my capacity as interim executive director for Queens Council on the Arts, but years ago, because I'm an old organizer, an old youth development person. I may look a little older than I actually am, but many years ago, I was the executive director of a youth organization at Washington Heights called Fresh Youth Initiatives, FYI for short. They're still there today. They still exist. We're probably into our 4th generation of terms of the executive director at this point in time. But the organization was designed with youth in mind and designed with youth development in mind, and the idea or the notion of turning youth development a little bit on its head. Brian said earlier that kind of expounded upon like how he doesn't like to lead with the arts in some ways. I think I might be messing it up, but that's kind of like what I heard a little bit there. And I think that organization did something very similar because they led with what they were. It was a lot of art involved. There were a lot of murals involved. There were a lot of things involved, but they led with what they were called with community service as opposed to art or that kind of stuff. But community service, a lot of it was the art stuff. And so, and I'm saying this because I think your question is, where can this go, right? And Zelly, and I think that for me, we still are scratching the surface. We're still scratching the surface between art, between young people, between the community, between empowerment and between leadership. And what I mean by that, so I'm going back many years, over 20 years. That's how long I've been in this game. That organization had in its charter, 1/3 of the board had to be under the age of 21. I don't know how old you are, Deb, but I imagine you're somewhere in that neighborhood, right? and there were, when I say that, what I'm saying is that there were kids as young as 14, as young as 12, who did things because they were board members, because they were made up through our board, like vote on my salary. They did things like vote on our annual budget. They did things like go to a public auction with me, about, I think 13 to 20 kids, I can't remember, I'm getting old. And with the intention of buying property because they wanted to build a building in Manhattan. These are 12-year-olds, these are 14-year-olds. And they came there with the intention to spend as much as $500,000 to buy the land. Now, I don't know it to be true. It's a story I tell. I've invested in it for 20 years, so I'm going to tell it again. When we went there, when I went to auction, I believe that we were so that all the business guys were there, all the real estate guys were there. These young people, believe it or not, were so intimidating that no one would bid against us. They came with the mindset to spend $500,000 because of the property they were going to buy. Now, the property they were going to buy was on 171st Street between Amsterdam and Audubon, right? It was formerly a live viviero. They sold illegal chickens, right? And the property itself might not have been worth $500,000. I'll be honest. I'm pretty sure it wasn't, right? But it was worth $500,000 because of what the young people intended to do with that property. We bought the property for under $300,000. Imagine being 12, 13, 14, 15 years old and buying property for your institution that you want to put a building on, put a youth community clubhouse on. And what I want to say is that the empowering nature of that, what we know now, what I know now, I want, 12-year-old Rodney, I wish he knew that. 13-year-old Rodney, I wish he knew then. Those kids were practicing what I know now. I wish they knew that. They were having that full experience. I'll fast forward because that building's been up now for almost 20 years. we built that building, a 4-story townhouse on 171st Street between Amsterdam and Audubon, which is designed for young people, their families, and the community to engage in public art, to engage in public activity, to engage in transformation, to engage in change for the community of Washington Heights. I don't know how many times we as nonprofits are willing to let young people like a Deborah who's on this call right now have the kind of power at a young age where they're making decisions, but with spending money or the direction of the organization or what's going to actually happen in an organization. Yeah, we get them involved in the product of creating something like a mural in the community, but are we helping them scale upwards and get them ready for the next trajectory of life, like college, like going to Duke, or like doing things that's going to happen in their lives? Duke, right, Deborah? Right, that's going to really change and happen in their lives. I don't think enough organizations are doing that. So the part of me sits here a little frustrated, a little bit disappointed that organizations, not you guys, but organizations in general, aren't pushing themselves to put youth on their boards, to put youth in empowering positions, to let youth make decisions about the direction of the work or the organization, to do those things. It's too adult controlled. And I want to know when we're going to wake up and start to empower our youth more and allow them to practice at a younger age what we learned as adults. You know, I sat on my first board when I was 30 something. What if I sat on my first board when I was 12, 13, 14, 15? You know, I didn't start running an organization and making decisions about the budget and where we're going to spend money until I was 20 something. What if I did that at a younger age? I didn't write my first grant until I was 20 something. What if I wrote a grant or participated in a brainstorming session when I was in my teens? You know, I didn't sit in my first meeting talking about and pitching a foundation, Pinkerton Foundation, until I was 25. By the way, they gave me my very first grant for about $50,000, right? But what if that happened when I was younger and I learned how to speak honestly and openly to power, and be in those boardrooms or be in those situations? I'm not saying it's going to be perfect. We'll mess up a few times, but what's going to happen for that young person, and how are we going to help them change their worlds in their future in a different, you know, by having that kind of access, that kind of opportunity? I'll pause and I'll stop, but I think your question, Zelly, was when does it get to be different? What's the future? I'm waiting. I'm waiting for more of us as leaders, because I'm getting old. I want to step aside. I would gladly turn over my seat to a young person and let them run an organization and maybe even do a better job than I do. And I don't mind, Brian, I don't mind being the old man. You know, we are the old man in the corner office over there that gets wheeled out every now and then, you know, give a little wisdom. You know, I don't mind being that kind of thing.
I'm working towards that. Trust me, I'm working towards that.
You know, I'm waiting for us. Yeah. I'm waiting for us, not just us on this panel, but society to wake up and start to empower young people more and trust young people more, because they make amazing decisions once trusted and empowered and given the skills and the tools. And this is the last thing I'm going to say, because I know there's probably some people on the call like, I can't do that, whatever. You know what's funny? Invariably, we'd be on a board meeting and there would be all kinds of people in the board meeting, right? And one of the old adults would say, adult professional would say, let's slow it down. We're covering some tough material here, like maybe about real estate or law or something like that, you know, that people are struggling with, right? And like, let's slow it down. We gotta help the kids catch up. What they're really saying is, I'm a professional, I'm an adult, I get paid for this, but I don't know this either. And I don't know how to say it any other way than slow it down for the kids. Now we're all smarter because we all slowed it down and we figured it out to bring the kids on board. You know, wink, wink, we get it. The kids got to catch up. No, sometimes the adults in the room got to catch up also, because we don't know everything. And we don't have any way that's honest to say that and communicate that about that. I can go on for hours, but I'll stop and I'll pause there.
Well, I think an interesting through line through your different stories is that, especially around what we're talking about tonight, that engaging communities, especially in the context of young people, in the arts is not just getting them involved in an art project or, you know, getting them involved in working with an artist. It's all scales of this conversation and allowing them to have access to those spaces and those conversations and those decisions at all points so that we get to that change.
Indeed, indeed, you're 100% correct.
Yeah, and I think as for us, and I think I alluded to it in the beginning when I sort of gave my answer, which I thought was the wrong answer, is that, I mean, for us, we have an explicitly youth-centered reason for creating environments where young people can share power, right? It's why we started camp. It's what we do at Beam Center. But as we talk, I think I personally always, immediately when I assume that when people talk about community, they're talking about location. And I've never been able to think of it that way because I started a camp in the middle of the woods. So it's, and we had to keep people safe. So it was the people who were there that were part of the community. But what I have come to learn, and what I think we're talking about here, is that it's who you invite into the space that creates the opportunity for everybody to share power and to share what they know. And one of the things that my partner Danny and I did not realize we were doing, we thought we were just hiring adults to help us do something with kids. But looking back 18 years, what we were doing was creating a community, broadly speaking, of youth and adults. And many of the adults that we started working with in our first summer of camp are still involved in some way or another with Beam Center. Yi, his involvement of Beam Center evolved and grew over the years that we knew him. And it put him into contact with Deb, who he's still talking to 4 years later, and is on a Zoom panel with. And it's by creating, and again, art is the pretext, the projects are the pretext, but it is the reason why you invite people in to share what they know and hopefully learn from that collaboration. So for me, it's creating, the art is the pretext to create a community, a multi-generational community of people who are willing to learn and share, which is why we're on this call.
Yeah, I'd actually love to hear from Deb again, as someone who was and still is a young person who had access to these sorts of environments. What would you like to see arts-related organizations do better or do differently to better engage communities, especially communities of young people?
Okay, so I'm gonna answer that question, but like to add on to your last question, I just want to say you can't even begin to understand the impact that community art engagement has on young people, because like it has played such a huge role in my life. Like being able to do such, even though my first art piece at Beam was like it was big, but it was like a piece of wood that I cut out and like I folded it and like my parents put it downstairs. Like that was a boost in my confidence and my ability and what I was capable of doing. And like from there, it just went up. So it wasn't just about my art, but what I was capable of accomplishing. So again, you'll probably never understand the full scope of what you all do, but it definitely does have a huge impact just beyond the art itself, as Brian said. So to answer your question, I would definitely suggest that programs continue to come into the schools, because that is how we hear about you. That is how I heard about Beam. And we may not be on the websites or hear from your Instagram pages, but when you come directly to us in the schools, that's where it starts. That's where it started for me. And I also want you guys to like not underestimate the value of what you do and the idea of breaking down the process of how these artworks and the projects come about. So kind of like Rodney said, talk about how the budget works and what it takes. And I would definitely applaud Beam for doing that, because I remember being on the board when we selected the project. So things like that gives us the opportunity to see what it takes beyond just the hands-on part that we do, but also the behind the scenes aspect. And that allows us to, one day become the leaders to do that in return for our community. So definitely just give us the opportunity and, have faith in our capabilities, which I believe everyone, all the programs on this call have done, but like the programs that are possibly listening. So yeah.
That's great. Thank you, Deb. I feel like we should put that on like a loop and just listen to that while we're at our desks. Just repeat, repeat, repeat. I think we have some questions in the Q&A box, so I'm going to read these out and we can take some time to answer for our audience. So the first one was that there was a reference to LMCC's way of engaging communities of artists and that they had an innovative way of doing that. And Lina, could you explain that a little bit more?
Yeah, I'm happy to talk a little bit more. Hopefully I'll remember the context in which I mentioned it. But yeah, I feel like innovative is such a wide, it's such an open word. And so I do think I would bring it back into this idea of intentionality and in the ideas of the different steps in which either us working directly with artists or the ways in which artists are working with the communities, that these notions around how are we creating the spaces to share an opportunity or an experience with a particular public or artists. And then from there, be always super mindful of not only what is that, but for whom is it, and how are we reaching that particular, public or artists? And then how are we ensuring that there's that, kind of genuine connection and interest for them to come and take advantage of that opportunity, again, being that the grant programs or an artistic experience. And so when we talk about innovative ways, and when I talk about it, it can be also ways in which people are working and might not be consider them innovative, but it's this notion of grassroots initiatives for me are quite innovative and continue to be, because the ways in which I've seen artists develop strategies, which sometimes we kind of also learn from and incorporate in our own practices of creating chains of communication that are of sharing between neighbors or sharing between groups of friends about a particular opportunity, and then supporting each other to ensure they know and can access a grant application, or that people from a particular neighborhood know about a grant, an artistic experience, and then end up going, who otherwise would not know, but understanding what it is that it takes for that particular community to attend an event or to access the resources is very important. And I think when we talk about innovative is around that notion of just being very aware and being very kind of creative and open around understanding there's multiple ways to think about how to invite the people you want to come to you to ensure that they come to you. And so being open of maybe it's not just about sending e-blasts and sending emails to people, but maybe sometimes is just going knocking on doors. Sometimes is about identifying people connected to that particular audience and then help asking them to help spread the word. It can look so many different ways to ensure that there's buy-in from a particular audience in terms of collaborating and develop a program, or again, to come and apply for the grant programs in my case. And then making sure that there's of equal benefit, right? Because I do think that's also something very important when we talk about community arts. And is this notion that it should be for mutual benefit? It's not just of it shouldn't be about a hierarchy of we, either artists or our institutions, are the ones that have the know-how and are the experts, and we just are having this for you to see it. because we think you would benefit from it, but actually saying like, no, like we want to learn from you by, you taking part of this program or opportunity, or participating in this artistic experience, and hopefully you can also learn from it or take something that would be beneficial to you. So I do think there's a lot of this notion of openness, being creative, being like experimental, and also of like seeing that kind of mutual benefit and trying to like do that collaboration. Yeah, I feel like what you were mentioning really resonates with me, because I do think like understanding the importance of collaboration and communication and kind of like a communal effort of what we're doing with artists or with the public is so important in this type of work. So I hope that helps, right?
Yeah, that also makes me think that, like, I mean, and it's represented by what we're doing on the call today, is that organizations, institutions have to work together to, in the way that leverages each's capacity to make a greater whole. So there are things, organizations are in different places. They have different specialties. They have different access to either audiences or funding. There really are few institutions that can do it all. And in fact, the ones that do it all sometimes are the ones that sort of absorb sort of the funding and the oxygen from the others. But rather that organizations should be working together collaboratively to make the most of, as Rodney says, the sort of crumbs that we're all chasing after, rather than chasing after them in competition. So for us, and I should say, what you're describing, Lina, is hard. Like knocking on doors is hard. It takes time. It takes money. It takes people, and there are so much we could do together that makes it less hard. For us, as we contemplate doing an open call, it used to be that we could do an open call for our camp projects, and we'd go out into the world, and we'd get a whole bunch of responses from everywhere. As we have tried to narrow and become more community engaged in New York City specifically, it becomes harder to get people to respond because it is. I don't know why, but when we think about being able to talk to other organizations and to tap into their networks, and to offer the opportunity that we can uniquely offer, which is to be collaborating with young people, it starts becoming more reasonable, and we can share the burdens of having to make use of the sort of scarce resources, unfortunately, that exist to do this kind of work in the way that we do it.
I also think it's one thing that stands out is that these are some of the tenets that make it sustainable, and that so many conversations around community engagement are tied to a grant or, are kind of case by case, or a funder told me to do it, or it's we have this idea and so let's find the community and to just make it happen. And I think we've all seen time and time again, those are the things that fall apart or happen for a season and don't come back. And so those are the things that you guys are talking about that make it something that is replicable and actually becomes embedded in these communities. So we have a question specifically for Deb about your experience, and says, will Deb continue her study or engagement of the arts at Duke, or will you be expanding your interest into different fields?
So while my focus there will be neuroscience and the pre-med track, Duke has this area called Duke Annex, which is like a space and building on campus where like you could use the art supplies for free and like use the studio. So I will definitely still be indulging in my passion, which I'm very excited about. Thank you for that question.
I will also share just another personal fun fact. I am a fellow Duke alumna, and so Deb and I have bonded quite strongly over that, and so she will have a nice beam connection there as well. We have another question for Yi, actually, that's about the materials for the Constellation and Constellation Light series. And it says that they were looking at the photographs and wondering about your perspective as the artist and what the process was like conceptually and materially, and they said that they are visually stunning.
Well, thank you. First of all, it was created by the fabrication team at Beam Center and Youth, so I can't really take credit for how it looks. I mean, I did participate in certain aspects of the creation, but just to backtrack where the ideas come from, you know, this project is very site-specific, is on Governor's Island, and it's also time-specific, during the pandemic. So going back to the first project I was supposed to work on with the Beam Camp called A Universe, you know, I was trying to make a giant bottle board, which is something of the size of a dwelling, 30 foot by 16 foot. And inside this giant bottle board, there were hands and feet that line the insides, as well as heads. And when it rains, water sort of dripped over the structure, it filled up these cups, and it's supposed to tip and spill and make music. So for that project, I was trying to align my vision of a camp project with my vision of my studio practice, which I think about healing a lot. And I think about architectural blueprints for healing. I make a lot of reliefs. And the A Universe project really trying to hammer in the metaphor that when there's storms in our lives, how do we slow down and pay attention to the cacophony of what's happening inside rather than being agitated by the sounds around us, right? So this thing becomes a giant instrument when it rains, the storms in our lives. So when the Constellation project came about, because Brian said, hey, you know, Beam Center's got this new spot in Governor's Island, we're looking for projects, got any ideas? And we want to pin the Beam Camp structure into the Beam Camp city structure with a similar aesthetic. So for the Constellation project, there are actually on the base of each of the 6 constellations, there's a hand, feet, eyes, nose. So those are the senses. And these senses sort of makes me, at least hopefully the viewer, reconsider the body of the island, right? Because during the pandemic, we felt like an island. We felt isolated from each other. But with these different body parts placed far away, how do you imagine the island as a body? And even with our own bodies, when I focus on my sense of touch, I can sort of zoom in on it and I can agitate myself, right? When I focus on my thoughts, they can seem separate from the rest of my bodily experience. But I want to show that we're all connected despite the fact that we might feel separated and disconnected. And with that in mind, the Constellations project not only sort of transformed the island into a body metaphorically, we also had the real practice of creating the bells with youth throughout the 5 boroughs in NYC. So, you know, Governor's Island is not an island isolated from the rest of New York City. And the project is not isolated from the rest of Beam Center programming. That's one programming amongst many programming, except that this one is a large project where they can't take home. So how do you give them, well, how do you embed metaphors and experiences that you can take home and grow with? And, you know, I'm imagining that these bells, while we're still somewhat isolated and quarantined to a certain extent, you know, youth can make a bell in a different time, different space, and then still communicate saying, hey, I made this bell, you made this bell, and the audience can actually come to Governor's Island and have a very different experience. The whole thing becomes very whimsical. When the wind blows, you're gravitated towards it, you hear it, it chimes, you can shake the structure. And there's many different ways to interact with the structure. And we actually spent a day just driving with the Parks Department, just trying to figure out the most scenic locations to put these body senses in. So these are the metaphors embedded into the structure. The materiality is sort of based on the project in New Hampshire of A Universe. And the bells specifically were inspired by silk cast ceramic bells, which is a technique that's used in I guess it's just clay making, but it is actually the direct inspiration was Arcosanti. They used silk casting there.
I'll also add that if you want to see some action photos of the youth that helped make the bells and weld the sculptures for Constellation and Constellation Lights, you can check out Beam Center's social media, where we have tons of photos from last summer.
Mm-hmm.
We have time for one final question from the audience, and this one is related to Brian and Beam Center. So they said, I really appreciate what Brian said earlier about creating a community in relation to engaging a community, and was wondering if you had any other insights or thoughts about inviting participants and cultivating agency and that people power that are critical to our experiences with Beam Center projects.
Oof. That's a big question. I think that wow.
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I was actually I have inside knowledge here, so I can feed you something.
Okay.
You mentioned the open call earlier, and I think
Right.
Deb mentioned sitting on the board that helped pick the Beam Center big projects. And I think that is one access point to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, you know, we've been on a journey, an 18-year journey, trying to understand how big projects serve youth most importantly, but you know, a community, and so, you know, like sort of. I can certainly relate to what Rodney's saying. Like when you want to do an idea and you're an adult and you want it to be for young people, your first instinct is to just do the idea for the young people, right? And you want it to be perfect. You want their experience to be great, and so you over design it to be engaged with, or to be done to, and over the years, we have been taught by the young people that, you know, that they are so capable, and that they that they are equal members of the collaborations that we do, and so in really the last 5-6 years, we've realized that the only way for our practice to continue and to sustain itself is to invite, make possible, you know, to have young people do the things that we thought we were supposed to do for them, for themselves, and with us. So as Deb said, about 5 years ago, we started having young people participate in the choosing of the projects. And this was something that started with Danny and I being the only people who were engaged in, and then we brought some staff in, and then, you know, all these years later, we started bringing young people in. This year, we had young people do the prototyping of the project that ended up at camp, the projects that were being done at Governor's Island. In essence, we are opening up the entire process that was once entirely adult controlled to being youth involved, youth led, and through that, everyone's experience becomes richer. So as Zaylee mentioned, we have just opened our second annual call for all 3 projects that we'll be doing in 2023. and at all level, young people will be involved in choosing, prototyping, citing, fabricating, along with the adults that are involved, and having direct engagement with the artists whose work we will be creating. So I don't know if it exactly addressed the question that was posed, but I think the short answer is the more you involve everyone in the process, the richer the experience becomes. And really, our next sort of frontier is how to engage the location and the people in the location of the projects as intensively in the process as we have begun to do with youth.
Thank you. So we do have just 5 minutes left, but Brian just mentioned our open call at Beam Center. So I wanted to give everybody else an option or an opportunity to call out maybe any upcoming exhibitions or your open calls or grant deadlines that you wanted to share.
Yeah, I can go ahead and do a pitch for LMCC's Manhattan Arts Grants. We just opened our annual application cycle for projects taking place in 2023. So if anyone here watching is a Manhattan-based artist, organization, or group with an arts project idea for 2023, definitely come look at the grant opportunities that we have available. You can go to lmcc.net/RSVP for more information about the grant programs that we have available. We will be offering a series of information sessions throughout the summer for people who are new to the programs. Our staff is also available to support people in preparing an application. And the application deadline is September 13th. So we still have some time left. And then you can find my contact information on LMCC's website, but also I'll drop it on the chat, and anyone feel free to reach out.
I can shout out, I have a solo exhibition coming up October 15th at Harkwood Gallery in the Lower East Side. Come through if you're around, and you can follow my work and see, get updates on my work. I have a varied practice of paintings and public art and social practice. So my handle at Instagram is at yeqin.zhu. That's my name, yeqin.zhu. I'll drop it in the chat real quick.
Quickly, Queens Council on the Arts, we're in the middle of our summer program now. We're wrapping that up. But I want to do a shout out and a call out about our high school to art school program, which will start recruiting in September for its new members. It's about 26 weeks. It makes for about 2 to 3 hours each day on Thursday and on Saturday. Last year's class was able to get their portfolios ready for college and apply to college and receive $4 million in scholarships. And 10 kids in that class got free rides to art schools, some of the best art schools around the country, doing that as part of that whole process. Putting together your art portfolio for college and getting money for college is probably the most daunting thing you will do as an artist. We love helping kids, helping young people sort of close that gap. And again, the application is not up yet. Stay tuned for that. That'll probably start in September, but look out for that. High school to art school.
Thank you. And Deb, I have to ask, when do you head off to college? When is your next opportunity starting?
August 15th. Yeah, very excited.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right. Does anyone on the panel have anything finally that they would like to share?
I'm just really happy to see Deb. I am just thrilled. So happy to hear you're doing amazing things. It warms my heart. It's really good seeing you.
It's great seeing you too, Yi. Thanks for putting my Instagram handle, Brian.
Just, doing whatever I can to sell those cookies.
All right. Well, thank you all again so much for joining us today and being part of this conversation. I am very excited that for some of us, this is the start of a new relationship between our organizations and will not be the last for those we've worked with already. As I mentioned, this has been recorded and it'll be on our Beam Center YouTube channel, and I will send it in an email to all of our attendees and our registrants. And then I've collected the links and the notes that have been shared in the chat, and I will include those in the email as well. All right, I think that's it. Thank you all so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.